Thank you all for participating in this session. First of all, I hope Sara, Saadoun, you can hear us now. Is that correct? Can you hear us? No, apparently she cannot. Can you maybe try and log in, log out again, or something? Maybe we'll write it down for you. Because apparently one of our key panelists might not be able to hear the conversation. No, maybe Joao, can you chat with her and maybe try to make sure that she can maybe hear us at some point. But we might be starting already. While we try to sort that out. Tutu, we cannot see you. If you can put your camera on so that we can start. Great. That makes.
Is that better?
It's better, much better. Again, thank you very much for everyone to participate in this session. While we try to sort the audio for Sara, Saadoun from Human Rights Watch, I just wanted to start by maybe making a few small announcements. First, thank you very much for all the audience that is participating. Secondly, we wanted to just give some housekeeping announcements about how the session will run. We will start with questions, Q&As sort of thing with the panelists. But after that, we plan to have to take questions from the audience. We will be taking 3 questions per round, and we please ask you to please use the raise your hand option of Zoom so that you can we know that you want to ask a question, and we kindly ask you to be brief because we want to have more participation from the audience. Hopefully we'll have enough time. I think there shouldn't be a problem to address the questions, but in any case, you also have the chat room to write down your questions. My colleague Joao will also be following them and maybe reading them out loud so that we can address them. Having said that, we'll move on to the session itself. APROFORT is just a project that is executed by TI Portugal, based in Lisbon. The project is meant to provide support, protection, and strengthening for activists and civil society organizations in Equatorial Guinea. And for this tasks, the project plans to set a human rights and governance observatory, a legal clinic in Malabo to assist activists that might be in trouble, to say so. And then it also plans to have grants and training sessions for civil society organizations. One of the key results or intentions of the initiatives is precisely to the abolition of the death penalty. We want to keep mentioning this because it's something that it's sort of our main expected outcome at the end of the process. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists. I hope that we will be able um, to have Sara in the discussions. I'm a bit worried about that, but in the panelists we have Ana Lucia. She's a professor at the University Institute of Lisbon. She is an expert, I would say, in Equatorial Guinea and Angola mostly. We also have Sara Brimbeuf from TI France. She oversees their campaign on the Bien Malaki in France, which involved the Vice President of Equatorial Guinea. Then we have Sara Saadoun from Human Rights Watch that has done a lot of research, and she has written extensively on how corruption impacts fundamental rights, focusing on Equatorial Guinea in particular. Last but not least, we have Tutu Alicante. Tutu Alicante is the founder of Gigi Justice. He is a very well-known activist, human rights and anti-corruption activist for most of people in Equatorial Guinea, I would say everyone. And he will be actually giving us a bit of a sense of how the situation is in Equatorial Guinea regarding these two main areas that we're going to discuss. So the session, we want to have it in three main big segments. The first one will be on the discussion about asset recovery. The second would be on governance and human rights broadly. And the last one, we want to dedicate it on the abolition of the death penalty and how things are evolving. So I will stop talking now. My name is Lucas Olo, just in case. I'm managing the grant, the APROFORT project. But this is not, I'm not the important part here. The important discussion has to do with these issues. And we will start, as I said, discussing about asset recovery. In that sense, I would maybe start with Sara Brimbeuf from TI France. I know that you have been campaigning, or TI France has been campaigning to change the regulation in France that allowed the French Treasury to keep the seized funds, but your campaign is trying to overturn this. Where is this heading so far, Sara?
Thanks, Lucas. Everyone can hear me? Just to check.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here today. I'm really happy to be here. Just to come back on your question, as you can imagine, the COVID-19 crisis has slowed down a lot of initiatives in France and in the world, and asset repatriation is not an exception. However, there have been really important updates in this field, especially in the judicial case of Obiang, which is intrinsically linked to the legislative development regarding asset repatriation. So I'll just come back really briefly on the last updates in the Obiang's case. As you might know, in February in last February, just a few weeks before the lockdown in France, the Paris Court of Appeal convicted Obiang Jr. for having laundered in France embezzled public funds. The court confiscated all of Obiang Jr. assets, and they amount approximately to 150 million euros. A few days after the court decision, Obiang lodged an appeal to the Cour de Cassation, which is the French Judicial Supreme Court. And the Cour de Cassation, is expected to make a decision in the beginning of 2021, so more or less in 6 months. And I just want to emphasize on the following point, because it is really important to understand the challenges of the legislative reform which is ongoing. once the Cour de Cassation would have made its decision, if the Cour de Cassation decides to confirm the Court of Appeal decision, the case will be closed. The decision will be final. And in France, the criminal law is not retroactive. There is exception, but I will not enter into the details because we are not here to discuss the French criminal procedure details. But the French criminal law is not retroactive, which means that you cannot apply a recently adopted reform to a case which has just been judged. You can apply a reform to a case which is about to be judged, but not if it has been judged. And as you know, the French legal system still does not allow for the repatriation of confiscated stolen assets, which means that if by the time the Cour de Cassation makes its decision, we still don't have any legislation to repatriate assets in France, it will just mean that it will be impossible to return Obiang's confiscated assets. It will be just legally impossible. It means that we just have 6 months approximately to adopt a law in France to allow this repatriation. So the less that I can say is that there is an urgency to legislate on these matters. And on this, regarding this point, the COVID crisis has badly reshuffled the cards because there's a high risk that the French government does not see the asset repatriation legislation as a priority. And so we are now actively advocating at TI France to convince them on the contrary. And so we have several meetings that are coming at the end of this month and in July, and we will do our best to just make them understand the urgency and the real need for such a legislation.
Thank you very much, Sarah. But just for clarification, so you mean that that there is a need to pass the law before the sentence is out? But regarding where the law sits right now, is it through Parliament, Senate, or is it in a place, or is still on government's desk, to say so?
Yeah, we have a bill that has been adopted by the Senate in first reading last year, but the government is supposedly preparing a draft bill himself, and actually, since the bill is touching upon the French Treasury, it has to be passed by the executive and not by the Parliament. So this is why we really need the government to jump in the process, and not only the Parliament. This is why the bill adopted by the Senate is not enough to have the bill to be passed.
Thank you very much for this clarification. Now we'll move on to Sara Saadoun. I know that I would like to know mostly your point of view about the assets that are abroad in Equatorial Guinea. Do you think that these assets should be or are going to make a huge impact for Equatorial Guinea particularly? And also, do you think that the funds should be returned no matter what right now? Sara? Saadoun?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, other Sara, for that update. So I think the question of the urgency around getting government's support for the response to COVID and the risks of money being lost to corruption, it's something it's important to think about in the case of repatriating these assets, but it's an issue that really touches at one of the key problems with emergency funding, which is that there's a sudden kind of rush of money to governments, and the sense of urgency to get it there quickly is so intense that very often the risks of corruption are overlooked in the name of the bigger of the urgency of getting money to support governments dealing with COVID. At the same time, because that money is so important for for actually getting to the people who need it, in some ways, the urgency of dealing with the risk of corruption becomes even stronger. And so managing, and balancing this is quite tricky. In terms of, Equatorial Guinea, I mean, one of the things that's kind of very peculiar to Equatorial Guinea is that in general, the problem is not a lack of government resources, it's a lack of a sense of responsibility toward putting those resources toward the people. And right now it's a little bit of a tricky moment because in addition to the economic impact of COVID, you also have the sharp decline in the price of oil. So, I mean, Equatorial Guinea is dealing with some serious economic issues right now. And of course, the money that that Switzerland is holding, the money that the United States is holding, and hopefully soon the money that France will be holding and ready to repatriate, can really be effective and helpful in addressing gaps in the government's response to COVID. And we should absolutely think creatively about how to use that, that source of money to meet this emergency. At the same time, I think it's really important not to become so, kind of overwhelmed by the sense of urgency that we forget about the real risks of corruption, and making sure that we're not cutting corners, and that the money is being returned in a way that is independent, that is bypassing the government entirely, and that is traceable and auditable, and really going to help people who are hurt either by the virus itself or by the economic impacts of the closure policies to address the virus.
Thank you very much, Sara from Human Rights Watch. I will now turn to Alicante. You can tell us a bit more, given sort of the kind of pillars that we're talking about here on asset recovery. But I wanted from you to hear more about the situation in the ground. Is how badly is affecting first the pandemic, and also how do you see this situation on the ground? Even if I know that you're based in the US, but you have good touch with the ground.
You're on mute.
Unmute. All right. Can you hear me? Yes. So yes, thank you, Lucas, and I commend you personally, and I commend your team at Transparency Portugal for this amazing project, APROFORT. The situation in Equatorial Guinea is dire. It's very, very dire. Which is why I'm happy to hear all the issues that Sara Saadoun has raised about, yes, the urgency to get funds over there, but also precisely because of that urgency, the importance of being rigorous about how any monies, and whether any monies, for that matter, should be going to Equatorial Guinea. Since the pandemic started, I've been working closely with folks in civil society, young people trying to figure out how to help with this situation, talking to embassies, talking to doctors, but also talking to the EG government folks, right? Talking to the Minister of Finance, talking to the Vice Minister of Health, and trying to figure out how to help, right? Because it is tough times like these, they have to bring us together in places like Equatorial Guinea, right? It's tough time like this that we have to put aside the fact that, we are ruled by, a very kleptocratic family, to figure out how we can all help. And it's been challenging. It's been challenging because one of the problems with kleptocracy is that it completely undermines the rule of law, which you all know this already. And that is what is being manifested here in the situation in Equatorial Guinea, to the point that, it becomes very difficult, almost impossible to even work with those people that you would consider potentially change makers within the regime, right? Because the rule of law is so broken down that it's impossible to do anything, right? So yes, asset repatriation is critical in these moments, yet particularly because of the lack of rule of law, because how the laws have been undermined, how any mechanisms for accountability have been completely eroded, it is critical that those of us on this side of that argument be vigilant and be serious about, what do we propose to DOJ, what do we propose to France, what do we propose to Switzerland, even in these tough moments, right?
Thank you, Tutu. I'm going to go back a bit to Sara from TI France. Your proposal has a number of sort of suggestions, right? Can you tell us a bit about them? Because I know that at least one of them mentions civil society, right?
Yes. Actually, we have 5 principles that are inspired by the best practices abroad and by principles adopted by several countries during a global forum organized in Washington in 2017. And one of those principles, we call it solidarity, which means that we request the implication and not only the consultation of civil society in France, but above all in the country of origin. So it means that according to us, a responsible asset repatriation process would not be responsible if it does not include, for the Obiang's case, for instance, the Equatorial Guinea civil society. Yeah.
And your proposal, one has a quick question.
Yeah.
On this. Your proposal, you think is in line with the ANCAC provisions? Equatorial Guinea signed also the anti-corruption convention. So did you have a look at that?
Yes, sure. Just to give some element of context to our listeners, I think you refer to the Article 57 to the UNCAC, which is about restitution, return and disposal of assets, which provide how to return assets once they've been confiscated. And of course, Equatorial Guinea and France, actually almost all of the countries in the world are part of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, the UNCAC. But in this particular case of Obiang and in all of the Biamalaki cases in France, Article 57 does not apply. And there is a simple reason, is that Article 57 only applies for confiscation that results from a mutual legal assistance request, or that results from confiscation request from the countries, the country of origin of the assets, which would be Equatorial Guinea for the Obiang's case. And in the Obiang's case, the confiscation made by the French authorities is what we call an autonomous confiscation. It does not result from a request for the government of Equatorial Guinea. It results from a criminal complaint that was filed 12 years ago by 2 NGOs. One of them is Transparency France, and those NGOs were suspecting several African leaders, including Theodorin Obiang Jr., of having laundered dirty money in France. And so because France is not bound to the Article 57, it can basically do whatever it wants with the confiscated assets. And this is why we need a law. We cannot just rely on the UNCAC Article 57. We really need a law in France that would go beyond, and that would allow French authorities not only to return autonomously confiscated assets, but that would allow them, and that would force them to return those assets to the population in the country of origin. And I will just finish here, but we really want also in our proposal, in our advocacy, we really want to distinguish between the population in the country of origin and the state of origin. And this is just a nuance that makes everything.
Thank you, Sara. Tutu, regarding actually that, you think that the civil society locally is, for instance, capable or ready to embark in such initiative, in the sense that the consultation that is needed, is there sort of a forum where that can happen? or what do you think about the status of the civil society in the country?
Folks, I come from a dictatorial country. You guys cannot keep muting and muting me. You gotta give me freedom of expression at all times, please. So before I answer the question as it pertains to local civil society, Lucas, which is a great question, to my colleagues in this fight, I mean, I think we have to dream big. We have to dream big. We have to think big. We have to make our fight a much bigger fight, right? I mean, I think because of all the folks involved in these conversations, I think it behooves us to look at the EG case in France, or the case in France against Théodorine, as bigger than just Théodorine, as bigger than just France, in fact, right? And what I mean by that, is figuring out, whether in addition to civil society from EG, which I'll talk about in a minute, whether the other more prominent people out there, more prominent organizations out there, that we should be engaging in this fight in France, not because we're dealing with Théodorine, but because we're dealing with an issue that affects so many countries, an issue that affects so many millions of victims in our countries, right? In the US, the reason there is a kleptocracy asset recovery initiative is because President Obama and Eric Holder made it a priority to ensure that those funds do not become part of the treasury in the US, but become monies that can be returned to fix problems in the countries where those monies were stolen from initially. There were similarly many lawmakers, US lawmakers, engaged in that fight. My understanding is that across Europe, the trend is changing to where there are more and more prominent people willing to be engaged in that fight. So one of the things that I would highly advise that we consider is figure out how do we engage those bigger voices in this struggle. And again, not because it is about Théodorine or about Equatorial Guinea, because it's because of the basic principles and the millions of people affected. The EG civil society is definitely ready to be engaged in this fight, right? And I've always talked to my colleagues about the importance of thinking about this fight, not just from the legal perspective or from the strategies that, TI France might put forward. I mean, I think we have to think about these issues from the perspective of strategic litigation that understands the importance of journalists on the ground, doing the work of raising awareness among the masses, a strategic litigation that involves civil society, organizations like SAID, EG Justice, now the project that you have, APROFORT, Somos Más, and others, talking about corruption, talking about kleptocracy in ways that the average people understand, in ways that, people begin to find ways to talk about those same issues happening at a smaller scale in their communities. There is no doubt in my mind that what Théodorine has done here is the exact thing that many ministers are doing in their ministries, where monies that should be going to address issues in those places, right? Now, they do not have the large scale of amount of money that Théodorine has to buy mansions elsewhere, but they are building mansions all throughout Equatorial Guinea. Why aren't we targeting that as an issue that raises awareness among people to engage in that fight? But to your specific question, yes, and you know very well, Lucas, that you yourself, myself, Alfredo, and many others, Ponciano, Maresus, and others, and now we have the Equatorial Guinean Commission of Juries, we are all prepared to be as engaged and as useful to this fight in France and wherever else needed as anyone can hope for. So yes, well, I think we are ready, and this is a fight that we should take on.
Thank you, Tutu. Thank you very much. I think we want to move on to a discussion which is quite related and to this, and is more regarding the current opportunities, if I may say, or the developments on governance in Equatorial Guinea. And for that, I will start with Sara. You, or Human Rights Watch, Sara Saadoun from Human Rights Watch. You were sort of campaigning or against the agreement, the recent agreement signed between the government of Equatorial Guinea and the International Monetary Fund. What were you sort of not supporting it? And has it had any change also given the current pandemic situation on your view?
I feel like I need to think of a nickname or something for for this this event. Yeah, so I mean, it wasn't just Human Rights Watch; it was us, along with many of the people on this call and many other organizations, where. So the IMF was, has been for the past few years starting programs with basically all Central African countries because of issues with the reserves of the CFA, of the franc CFA, and so Equatorial Guinea was the last kind of country on their list, and in 2018, the IMF adopted a new framework for addressing corruption risks, where now, unlike previously, where corruption was something that they could potentially address, but were not required to, which led to very inconsistent ways of handling corruption. Now they had to actually systematically look at corruption in every member country, and where they decide, their analysis concludes that corruption is serious enough that it's affecting the economic health of a country, they need to actually take that into consideration in how they build the program. And so, I mean, it's hard to think of a country where corruption has impacted the economic health of the country more than Equatorial Guinea. I mean, I don't need to kind of give you the statistics on the relative wealth versus the poverty and spending on health and education and things like that. But it actually has the largest gap in the world between per capita income and quality of life. Sorry, human development, I think, is the actual name of the index. And so the idea of the IMF giving a loan to Equatorial Guinea was, on the one hand, horrifying, because it was just a way of handing more money to a regime that had squandered its resources, and so basically the government taking on debt which would impact future generations to sustain its luxury lifestyles of government officials, especially given the conviction in France of the vice president, the fact that the vice president continues to have these enormously expensive assets, mansions, yachts, planes, that are all purchased with government money. So on the one hand, it was like absolutely horrifying and against the whole this new approach that the IMF was supposed to take to corruption. On the other hand, it's also an opportunity, right? Because the fact that Equatorial Guinea is a country that doesn't rely on taxes and doesn't rely on international aid, and is 40 years same president, it's very difficult to find points of leverage that actually can allow you to affect change. And so we approached the loan as somewhere between the two. On the one hand, we understood that any money would probably be lost to corruption, and at worst, and then at best it's just replacing money that's been lost to corruption. At the same time, here you have an opportunity to push for change, and so that we were kind of skirting that line the entire time. And the thing, I think the a couple of things did come from it. So first is the fact that they are signatories to the UN Convention Against Corruption is one very concrete thing. But we pushed very hard for strong requirements within the loan, including publishing oil contracts, publishing the assets of government officials, and other kind of classic anti-corruption measures. And the program itself, if it is actually implemented, is relatively strong. But the other thing is that was attached to the loan is a requirement that Equatorial Guinea apply to become a member of the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. And that is really important because that's not only transparency around natural resources, but that also requires respect for civil society. And so in order to make a credible application to EITI, Equatorial Guinea would have to show how they are respecting civil society, which is, obviously something that it's not easy for it to do. And so, it opened up this, kind of complicated set of advocacy with EITI, with the IMF, trying to push Equatorial Guinea on its treatment of Said and other society organizations, as well as transparency around its resources. Was it worth it? I'd be interested to hear what others think. But I really appreciate, Lucas, the report that you're working on that looks to see if these measures are actually being implemented, because it's certainly not worth it if the measures are not being implemented. And so that's something that we really have to stay very much on top of the government, on top of the IMF.
Thank you, Sara from Human Rights Watch. I would now ask Tutu precisely following up on this, because as Sara mentioned, the initial the reasons for the previous situation, for the previous sort of cancellation of the process of Equatorial Guinea entering the EITI was not allowing or limiting the space for civil society. Particularly, I remember the case of Said and Alfredo Kembe particularly. But last year, we know that Said was also banned from working in the country. And then we have this last month's period where the pandemic came in, and it was in the middle of a process where the EITI board was supposed to review Equatorial Guinea. Would you say that there was enough changes, or there is something that happened in the last months that could inform the decision of the EITI board regarding Equatorial Guinea? Apparently, they might be up for review in September.
The answer is no. No, I mean, Lucas, I think you and I both follow events very closely in Equatorial Guinea, right? And you alluded to all the harassment, house arrest, etc. that Alfredo was subjected to. You and many of you also know that Paisa Joaquin Eloy Yeto was in prison, from February of 2019 until recently, February of this year. And many of you must have heard about the case of a nurse in Equatorial Guinea. I believe it was in March. I can't remember the date, March or April, that was briefly imprisoned only for sending a WhatsApp message to someone saying that, we didn't have enough oxygen in one of the hospitals to deal with the COVID, the pandemic. There has been numerous doctors, numerous healthcare professionals that have been targeted and fired by the regime because the regime accused them supposedly of leaking out information about COVID patients, how many patients they are, and the fact that they're not receiving good services. The World Health Organization director in Equatorial Guinea was kicked out of the country recently. I think it was in April or May. supposedly because she is giving out information about, how many people are infected and, the death rate. Up until then, that was the only way for us to know what was happening on the ground in terms of the hundreds and hundreds of people that now we know are infected. Since firing this person, the government has stopped giving out any information about what the real situation is. And we know about the case of, I believe it was 5 or 7 journalists that whose program was suspended, and I think them themselves were kicked out of Asonga, supposedly for criticizing the fact that the police were beating people around, and extorting money from people in the streets, using the COVID pandemic as an excuse. So Equatorial Guinea, fundamentally, those of us that know EG, is a country that does not respect human rights. And they are not going to respect human rights because they want to get in the EITI. That is a fallacy for us to think or suppose that. So things have gotten worse. And there's nothing in my mind that would justify the EITI board or the decision makers here reaching any other conclusion. Things are not better in Equatorial Guinea. As far as civil society participation, as far as freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of assembly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tutu. I want to move on to Ana Lucia, that she's been quiet all this time. I wanted to ask you, because you know how the situation is also in a very, I would say, similar country, not in size, but maybe in structure, which is Angola. I don't know if you can tell us a bit, if for instance, the institutions how strong the institutions are either in Equatorial Guinea or compared to Angola to bring about change through such programs, right? From IMF or organizations like as such.
Okay, thank you. I hope you all can hear me. It's a pleasure for me to be here with all of you and to discuss this. And this is a very challenging question, Lucas. Well, we know both countries are authoritarian regimes, and they are not competitive authoritarian regimes. So there are regular elections in both countries, both Angola and Equatorial Guinea, but elections mean nothing due to electoral fraud and to other mechanisms. Both regimes control local and nominally democratic institutions. Both countries have an hegemonic logic of power. Of course, Angola is bigger than Equatorial Guinea, and both are presidential systems. Both have strong men ruling. The one difference here, and I think this is key, is that in Angola, the political bureau of the party, of the ruling party, is quite strong. And despite the fact that the Angolan president is a very strong man, he needs to rely on the party, unlike Equatorial Guinea. The party was, even for the fact that PDG was founded by President Obiang, it says a lot about the creation of a party at the image of the creator. Also, and going back a bit to ideas already raised by Sara and Tutu, the impact of this COVID crisis and the impact on the economic institutions in both countries. Sure, human rights will keep be really harmed in both countries, despite the international linkages. Now both countries are facing a major economic recession, not only due to the decline of the oil prices, as Sara mentioned, but also due to the fact that economy is so dependent on oil and on the extraction industries and on the exports, that they are going to face severe economic and social restrictions. But we have here now a twist, a small difference. I don't know if this will have impact in the days to come, but João Lourenço, the president of Angola, he is showing signs of more institutional transparency and openness to political dialogue, even if he targets mostly the former president's family, namely Isabel dos Santos, and Luanda Leaks was there to show us this. There are a cautious hope to democracy in Angola. because the president is willing to dialogue. The president is addressing issues, even with major economic recession, but still it is a sign of dialogue. And of course, he needs to show, to internationally show this openness if he needs to deal with economic recession and with financial support by international institutions. Equatorial Guinea, in my point of view, it's totally different. Of course, we have a very complex relationship between informal institutions as personalism, clientelism, patronage, and formal institutions like all the laws existing in the country. But Equatorial Guinea, since independence and even since the 80s, before the oil boom, has strong economic linkages with different countries, be democratic or autocratic ones, be Eastern countries or countries from the West. And this is despite all the records on human rights. And of course, these ties have allowed the country to gain international recognition without having to change the regime contours, the regime foundations. Oil come to facilitate the international patronage system. And Obiang and Obiang's family, they are at the center of this patronage system. But in my point of view, and Angola doesn't do this as well as Equatorial Guinea. The regime, it shows ability and creativity in branding itself internationally. And I think President Obiang, he's a very creative person, and the regime is very creative in the way they are branding the regime internationally to gain support. And I would stop here.
No, but that's actually a good point for us to move to the next discussion, which will be about the death penalty. But Sara, Saadoun, you wanted to raise your hand.
Yeah, I wanted to make just a super quick reflection on sort of what's becoming clear to me as I listen to all of you speak, is that essentially what all of this is trying to do, from corruption trials in France, asset repatriation, IMF, EITI, all of this is essentially ways of addressing corruption that circumvent a lack of political will to address corruption. So this is all an experiment in how can foreign governments, foreign institutions, foreign initiatives basically force a country to be more transparent and accountable in how it spends its resources if the entire government is resistant to doing that. And the more I've been working on Equatorial Guinea now for 4 years around, and the more I've sort of looked at this trajectory, and I think I give us a lot of credit, and including my colleagues on the phone, for being extremely creative and extremely thoughtful and extremely aggressive in trying to find these ways to do that. Ultimately, when you have a government that lacks the political will, or whose political will is hostile to these initiatives, you really hit a wall pretty quickly. And so we should keep doing these things, and we should keep thinking creatively about how to address them. But as Tutu said, I think very well, at some point, you need the political will there, or you're not going to get actual change.
Thank you. Thank you, Sara. Going back to your comments, Ana Lúcia, regarding the branding, right? I think it's very important discussion, because the issue of the death penalty it was also thought as an initiative to allow the country to enter the CPLP, the community of Portuguese-speaking countries, and maybe it was part of a similar branding initiative, right? But how do you see the CPLP being able to actually, I wouldn't say force, but to achieve the goal of the abolition of the death penalty?
Well, first and foremost, the abolition of death penalty was a condition for Equatorial Guinea to enter the institution. And the Equatorial Guinea entered the institution without abolishing death penalties. So here, again, it was a really nice move from President Obiang and from Equatorial Guinea, because they entered and they gain access to this institution without respecting the route previously accorded to join the institution. But well, the CPLP, the Community of Portuguese-Speaking Countries, is an under-the-radar international organization. It is not a very powerful organization in the international system. And members need to fulfill some conditions to enter the community. One of them is having Portuguese as an official language. And in Equatorial Guinea, Portuguese is an official language, not due to the history of the country, not due to the people's will, but due to the President Obiang's will. The roadmap for Equatorial Guinea to adhere to the CPLP had 5 axes. And one was, and I'm quoting, the reception and implementation of the community collection, namely the respect of human rights and elimination of the death penalty. Well, we all know that death penalty is still in force in the country. The penal code is in force in the country, is the Franquist penal code introduced during colonialism in 1963. I believe this is about to change. I don't know if you have more news on this, but still, the death penalty is still a very cracking issue, inclusively among the other countries members of the CPLP who accepted Equatorial Guinea. There are no records on sentences of death penalty after the accession to the institution, but as one activist says, the regime doesn't need to have this. Juan Tomás Ávila says, okay, the regime doesn't need the death penalty to be an autocratic regime, to be a repressive regime. I will highlight another axis because it was the route established, the promotion and integration of civil society in the activities of the CPLP, and that axis disappeared in the notes produced and the reports produced by the CPLP after the first meetings in Malabo, even in 2012. It was never commented inside the CPLP. Civil society just disappeared. Of course, as Tutu said, nowadays civil society is ready to deal with the issues in debate today here in this roundtable. As Somos Mas said in the country, in the diaspora, as EG Justice, we are dealing with a different civil society in terms of organization and capacity of organization than we had before. And let's hope death penalty will be abolished, not due to CPLP. I'm pessimistic on this, but due to I'm more optimistic on APROFORT in this sense.
That makes me move to Tutu, particularly on this, because again, the death penalty, now there is a moratorium in place since I think the entrance of Equatorial Guinea and the CPLP. But how important you see is still to the abolition of the death penalty, also taking into account that there are other issues, human rights issues in the country, and also if you can tell us a bit about when was the last time there was death sentences in Equatorial Guinea. We know that the last record of public records on the news were from 10 years ago from 4 suspected coup plotters. But what can you tell us about the death penalty in general? I would even say
in general. Well, what I'm about to say might make me a revolutionary over here, but I'm happy with that title. I think, and I will put this in context. I think there is death penalty in the US, right? So I think in EG, the problem is bigger than the death penalty, right? It's a fundamental issue of human rights, right? And what I mean by that, I mean, the reason we oppose death penalty, the reason we oppose torture, let's stick with those two specifically, is because these are cruel, these are vicious, these are inhumane ways in which the government is treating human beings, right? In case of death penalty, obviously, is a state sanctioning of something that is inhumane, something that violates every single principle that human rights stands for, right? So we understand that. However, we know that this is a country that fundamentally violates every single human right. This is a country that's antithetical to the whole idea of human rights, right? So for me, the project APROFORT, you know, our goal, the objective here has to be bigger than just dealing with human rights, with the death penalty. And what I mean by that is that Obiang could come tomorrow and say, you know, we have abolished death penalty. However, as you and I know, Lucas, people are still being tortured to death in prisons in Equatorial Guinea all the time, right? If you talk to Paisa, if you talk to Ramon, they'll tell you that while they were in prison, people were being beaten to death, right? And other prisons could hear that. So abolishing the death penalty, yes, we should push for that. That shouldn't be the end goal. Our end goal should be having a country in which basic fundamental human rights are respected, in a country in which the government, the people that go out there and sign agreements with the CPLP, sign agreements with IMF, sign agreements with the EITI, understand the fundamental meaning of human rights and why they should respect human rights. For me, that's a bigger goal. When was the last time there was a state-sanctioned death penalty? My belief is that it was right before they signed the moratorium, right before Obiang announced the moratorium. There were, I believe, 4 individuals, they were killed, right? Since then, however, there have been at least 2 instances on the continental side, one in Bata, I believe one was in Mikomiseng, where the prosecutor, the fiscal, asked the judge to impose the death penalty. At least in one of those cases, the death penalty was actually imposed. Given the nature of Equatorial Guinea, where we don't know what's happening in all these prisons, they're out there in, you know, Ovengazeng and Mikomiseng and God knows where else, we don't know whether these people are still alive or not. There are several cases of young military men that have been taken away, and we haven't heard from them in years and years. So we don't know what's happening behind closed doors. And that, to me, is a bigger problem as to whether Obiang abolishes the death penalty or not, which we want him to abolish, right?
Thank you very much, Tutu, and thank you very much to all the panelists. We're trying to catch up with the time, so we want to also allow the audience to ask questions, because I think the 3 issues raised or discussed here are very important. There is a Q&A window for questions, but maybe I will allow Joao to share what is there already, and then we ask people to ask for, to ask questions whenever they want. I think there is an option, right? They can use. Joao?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for your presence, for accepting our invitation and sharing your input on Equatorial Guinea and the human rights and the death penalty. We have so far one question from Diana Casey, which I believe is the executive director from the Lebanese Oil and Gas Initiative from Lebanon. Diana, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Yes.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much. Hello. I don't know whether it's good morning, good evening, good afternoon, but I'm based in Lebanon. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the good insights. My interest in attending this is that I sit and I represent civil society on the EITI board. I'm also head of the Outreach and Candidature Committee. Chair. So I really appreciate the discussion that was held today, and especially the aspect that was tackled regarding the EITI candidature process. Indeed, we did receive in February, my committee received the application, and as civil society representatives along with Simon Taylor, and I believe we reached out to Tutu and Alfredo and others in Equatorial Guinea, we successfully pushed towards we did not reject the application, but neither did we accept it. What we said was that definitely certain issues need to be tackled regarding to civic space. We highlighted breaches that were happening, and we asked for further amendments to be done. But that was all, of course, the main recommendations should have been based upon the recommendation of a mission, coming from a mission that we asked the International Secretariat to do. Of course, COVID then broke out and we were not able to do it. But a really quick update on where we are now. There were certain issues that needed to be tackled with the application itself. It's not done. We got a response from the government that they will do that and they will resubmit it in October. Of course, we stand very strong on the pretense that this cannot proceed because of the breaches of civic space you know, the whole issue around the engagement of civil society. I do believe that civil society is also arranging a sort of a meeting. The last I know is that it's now being pushed till September, if I'm not mistaken. We're really keen on knowing more about it if you do have updates. And my question here, and this is the question that is always being thrown back at us by other constituencies, especially the companies. And it's like, don't you believe that if we do allow them in and they become, you know, Equatorial Guinea becomes a candidate, that we are per se opening more civic space? Now, I personally have a strong view against that, but I'd really like to listen to your points of view. Is there a fair trade-off there? Does it really allow this to happen, you know, entering EITI, and or should we continue using it to get, you know, all, for example, one very material thing is revoking Alfredo's, you know, the ministerial decree that dissolved Alfredo's organization. So, you know, is it a leveraging tool? And I'd really like to hear that, you know, your opinion about it. And apologies for the prolonged question.
No problem. I think the question is more for Tutu in this case. If I may ask Tutu to please respond to this question.
Okay. So should we allow Equatorial Guinea in as a way to hold him accountable? Is that your correct question?
If I think it's about if that will open the space for civil society, therefore it's a good trade to.
So I had a conversation with Marciela Baga. Marciela Baga is one of those you know, pillars of civil society in EG, one of the institutions like Alfredo. They've been there forever, and is a current member right now of the National Commission. And that was actually his proposal, right? That was his proposal, you know, let's allow EG in. And as we know, this him talking, as we know that EG will not comply, then that'll be a shame for them, and then that'll give us space to push them. I think it is easy perhaps to underestimate how authoritarian governments that do not believe in human rights as a principle think and act, right? You're dealing here with a mafia organization that has textually told people like Alfredo or people like Lisa Misol. Lisa Misol is someone that was at Human Rights Watch right before Sara and met with Clemente Ngonga. These are these representatives of the EG government have told them straightforward, we will not allow civil society to operate in this country, right? And I said this earlier, that is not because of the EITI, that is not because of the IMF, and that's not because of the UN. That's because, you're dealing with people that want to continue to hold on to power illegitimately, to keep themselves, rich as possible, etc., right? So allowing them into the EITI as a way of promoting change and giving space to civil society, to me, is a fallacy, right? It's not something that works in highly dictatorial places, right? Engaging with them with the EITI, engaging with them with other institutions, perhaps might be a good thing, because there might be people there like the minister in charge or other people who right now might begin to listen to, okay, why is this important? But while we still have the people that we still have in power, I don't know that allowing them into something like the EITI opens any door for civil society in the country.
Thank you, Tutu. We have another question from the audience. I think is Nzang Simi. Maybe you can ask your question. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. It's very simple. I mean, during the presentations that, by the way, I think that were very insightful for me as an Equatorial Guinean to hear others analyzing the situation. One of the speakers mentioned the links, economic links or financial links from, I wouldn't say Equatorial Guinea, but from Teodoro Bianchi and Gemen Basogo with other nations. So my question to the panel is about how can we put some pressure to these nations that had financial links with Equatorial Guinea? How can we put some pressure for them to support the civil society to make changes in society? Because whilst I heard the presentations, I haven't heard yet kind of a plan of action of how we can actually gain those spaces and how we can put pressure, for example, to France, to Spain, United States. These are some of the countries that it comes to my mind when we're thinking about big deals, financially speaking.
Thank you very much, Zain Simi. Maybe I will ask Sara Saadoun this question because she works in an organization which is global, and I think you also sort of lobby in, let's say, capitals, and then work on the ground. So what can you tell Zhang about this?
So the first comment is actually linked to the last question around, to what extent do we give Equatorial Guinea opportunities to rebrand itself? Because the way that other governments work and companies work is that they're less concerned about what the reality is on the ground, and they're much more concerned about the perception of their relationships with unsavory governments. And I very much agree with Ana Lucia when she said that Obiang is unusually creative in thinking about ways to rebrand, and very good at using whatever leverages and resources he has to do that. And that he's had, the Equatorial Guinea has this very unusual position of having financial links to a kind of an unusual mix of countries, from the United States, Cuba, China, like countries that normally, usually countries that you kind of choose sides in the kind of global geopolitics, but Equatorial Guinea manages to sort of maintain relationships with everybody. And one of the big ways it does that is through rebranding. So, even if you can point to some, in a moment of Equatorial Guinea trying to gain access to EITI or something like that, for 5 minutes they, pretend to care about civil society, which even that they're not actually doing, because they still are not allowing, for example, say, to function. But what are they getting in return? That is rebranding. The IMF loan is much more valuable than the money, is rebranding. And so one of the things that we work really hard on is fighting back against, against that reputation laundering, and bringing the kind of real human rights record that's happening on the ground to make that case in capitals around the world. For example, the trial against, following the attempted coup, and bringing the American Bar Association into that, and kind of bringing that to those stories to the U.S. Congress to basically help them understand what's actually happening on the ground and to fight back against those rebranding efforts. And of course, institutions like the IMF are made up of votes that are dictated from foreign capitals. So that's, part of the advocacy. The other is directly with companies. And, as more governments adopt laws that allow, that allow them to investigate potential corruption of companies registered in their jurisdictions but operating abroad, that means that we can push U.S. government, French government, etc., to not only investigate corruption by Equatorial Guinean government officials, but by corruption by their own companies, registered in their countries that are participating in the corruption in Equatorial Guinea. And so, I mean, these are just a few examples, but yeah.
Thank you, Sara. I would do a bit of a weird change to Karina Carvalho. Sorry that I'm catching you on the spot. Because of APROFORT wanting to campaign against the death penalty towards organizations such as the CPLP, is it something that would sort of respond to Zhang's questions about what can we do globally on supporting this type of initiatives?
Hi, Lucas. Hi, everyone. Yes, for sure. I just wanted to make a question, because I think the panelists have many interesting things to share, and I'm here pretty much to listen and to your thoughts. I was wondering if you think that UN agenda and the SDGs in particular, SDG 16, could be also a good opportunity to make human rights and the links between human rights and corruption to be on the spotlight. I was thinking in particular in terms of, the Addis Ababa agenda, so finance for development, and to introduce something like accountable finance for development, like countries not receiving money if they cannot, present themselves better equipped in terms of, promoting civic space and fundamental freedoms and liberties. So this was my first question. And the second one, I know that we usually don't think about the business sector as a relevant stakeholder when we talk about human rights, but I wonder if it's not also the time to engage the business sector and initiatives such as the UN Global Compact as key stakeholders for our initiatives, because truly they are the ones financing most of these kleptocratic regimes. So this is the only question. Thank you so much, and I'm very happy for the conversation. I think it's been incredible. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina. Karina is the executive director of TI Protocol. I didn't say it before. She's sort of the boss here. But the first question on SDGs, maybe Ana Lúcia, you can tell us maybe something about that, and then the second one I would maybe think of Sara Saadoun on the companies involvement. Ana?
Okay, well, all the development goals, being there sustainable or millennium or horizontes, as we know, we are facing commitments that are not taken seriously by the countries. And what Zhang and Simbi told, it's about human rights, and basic human rights are not being respected in Equatorial Guinea. And I'm not talking about basic freedom or civic spaces. I'm talking about access to potable water, for example, access to housing, access to know that I will have something to eat at the end of the day without depending on having the the party's carnet or to having someone near the government so I can provide to my family. And when we deal with these very basic forms of non-respect of human rights, I don't believe how can we address the SDGs to overcome the situations. And regarding fundamental freedoms and fundamental rights, I'm recalling what happened in the 90s. International institutions and international donors told the countries, so you need to democratize, you need to hold elections. And the countries assumed, okay, we will organize elections, we will organize regular elections, and Equatorial Guinea has a record of regular elections. But at the end of the day, they are not free, they are not fair, they are inclusively, the electoral laws in Equatorial Guinea allow the presence of the military in voting stations. So when we have such a so repressive environment, I hope we could talk about SDGs, and of course, I'm not trying to be cynical, and I'm quite optimistic in other aspects of my life, and I strongly believe in the role civil society can have and is having, and the international linkages of EG's civil society. It's also a sign of a better future. I hope so.
Sara, Saadoun, on the business sort of on the company's side, what can you tell us also compared to other countries? What's the push from private sector, an important push for reform in other examples that you might have in mind?
I'm sure, if it's okay, I just want to add one thought to what Lúcia said, because I very much agree that one of the major challenges with Equatorial Guinea is that the government is really good at doing like fake processes. Like it's like, and something with SDGs, I mean, one of the major issues is that the lack of reliable data. So, one of the reports, I think it was MDGs, but like there was just, the government report was congratulating itself on a steep decline in poverty. It cited these numbers to a health survey conducted by a US firm. I actually called the firm and they said, we never conducted poverty survey. And they gave those numbers to the IMF. The IMF republished those numbers. And so, and then Equatorial Guinea cited to the IMF as the source for those numbers, citing the exact document that they, you know what I mean? So you have this like really sophisticated data laundering and fabrication system. They can, and that's also what makes it really dangerous to kind of put hope in these processes to address these fundamental human rights problems and corruption problems, because they can fake them pretty well. And that relates also to our work with businesses, because businesses are all too happy to kind of accept these processes as somehow legitimate and rely on them to do business. But more to answer the question more directly, I mean, we do some advocacy with businesses. Obviously the oil businesses are the major ones. Ironically, to some extent, we've more kind of used them as advocacy targets to intervene when there's like kind of excessive government repression, right? Like that, to the point where even the companies kind of feel uncomfortable. And there have been a couple of cases where they've sort of behind the scenes echoed our calls on releasing people from prison or whatever. But what we don't do enough of, I think, is actually exposing the companies, the way in which the companies are basically complicit in the corruption, and in part because it's very, very difficult to get the documentary evidence, and especially companies that have to be careful from the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in the United States. They've developed very complex methods of that are, back in the 90s, for example, or the early 2000s, there was this kind of very crude methods of getting money to government, and now it's more through these kind of complicated joint ventures and things like that. But I do think that there is more room to kind of probe where, how companies are complicit in corrupt deals.
Thank you, Sara Saadoun. I will move on to the question from the audience. I think there are two questions, one from Martin and the other one from Marion. Can we allow them, Joao, to ask their question?
You can ask your question, Martin.
Hi everyone. Thank you. It's been very interesting, and I believe this could be a useful point for the discussion. Yesterday I saw a trailer for a movie that's going to come out this year called Influence, regarding the role of Bell Pottinger, a PR firm from the UK. And afterwards I'll share the link here. And basically I'd like to know, regarding Equatorial Guinea and its current international reputation, do you guys know anything about the role of PR firms and how could they help with our campaign and our efforts?
Thank you. Maybe we take the second question, then we answer both of them from Marion too.
Hi everyone. Do you hear me now?
Yes. Okay.
Yes, I'm Marion from Publish What You Pay. So, I mean, it was not really a question, it was more of a comment to say that it's very challenging to address any issues related to civic space, human rights in EG. I mean, all the participants have highlighted it very well. Nevertheless, one of the avenues we found that was useful in the country is indeed the private companies. And I can mention one of them. Sorry, no, actually, I will send you a message later. But basically, I think it's something we should really invest on because of the reputation of those companies in the country, the reputation of the country. They need to track those companies, the investment, and it's really important for them to have a good image. So I think it's really something we should invest time on. Because it could have a real impact. I don't think companies are generally going to support the overall improvement of civic freedoms in the country, but nevertheless, they've been really good partners in supporting the work of human rights defenders when they were attacked.
Thank you, Marion. I want to ask Tutu to maybe address the question from Martin regarding the PR firms. I think he mentioned how can they help or how, but maybe you can also talk about how they were also part of, have been part of the branding of the country. And maybe you want to mention then something about Marion's comment on companies.
Well, I mean, first of all, I know we're running out of time here, so I want to thank everyone that's participated, as I know this might be my last intervention here. The regime, and I'm glad, so many of you, particularly Sara Saadoun, has highlighted this, Sara Saadoun and Ana Lúcia has highlighted this concerted effort and very calculated effort by the regime in Equatorial Guinea, enabled by funds from some of the oil companies there to rebrand itself. And that they've done in a calculated way in the US using several PR firms, right? Right now they have Corvis, I think Corvis Communication, but prior to that, they had several others. They have had a slew of PR firms, including no other than Lanny Davis, one of the top lawyers that represented Clinton way back when, to whom they paid a $3 million contract, right? And Obiang has carefully used that strategy here and in London also, and actually also in Spain, all throughout Europe, it seems, to get access to politicians and get access to powerful decision makers. So there's no doubt that that's a very calculated and strategic approach by their side. Those of us in civil society, we face a few challenges. One of them is funding, right? Many of these PR firms are super expensive. Those of you that know that. However, despite that, I have to say that, we have been very strategic and very smart at doing PR to counter the work that Obiang and his people have done. The amount of work that EG Justice, Human Rights Watch, and others did to oppose the UNESCO Obiang award raised the profile of the country in good ways and in bad ways, right? Many people then know, because we were able to involve, Wally Soyinka, Desmond Tutu, Graça Machel, and all these important people into that fight. They knew what was happening there. Similarly, recently we had a big campaign when Ramon, an artist, comic artist, was in prison, where there again, HRW and Community to Protect Journalists and many other, PEN and others, we teamed together to launch a global campaign with artists from around the world, and that helped, right? So though I'm recognizing that, funding for us is challenging when you go to these rough PR firms, there are many ways in which, we should be doing the rebranding of EG. We should be doing the setting up what's the narrative that we want people to know about Equatorial Guinea, right? So to that extent, I hope, I believe it was Martin that asked the question, I hope that, we can continue this conversation and think about, okay, how do we use the young Equatorial Guinean voices all throughout the globe, in universities throughout Europe and China and everywhere, to start rebranding, because we might not have access to the PR firms, but we do have the truth on our side, the truth about what's happening in EG. And we have a lot more creativity than Obiang, despite what Ana Lucia said about Obiang being creative and all that. I think we have a lot more creativity, and certainly we have Ramon on our side, and he has creativity.
Thank you very much, Tutu, for this last comment. And Ramon is actually on the attendees.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So he just heard you, I guess. But we have to be finishing, but there is one person that raised his hand earlier, and it's Mr. Cruz Melchor. I cannot close the meeting without giving him the floor, because he's such totem, I would say, for a lot of Equatorial Guineans working on these issues. Please, Mr. Cruz, can you go ahead?
Allô?
Yes, we can see you.
Allô?
Yes.
Je voudrais vous dire que je suis très content d'avoir suivi cette conférence très intéressante. Mais ce que je voulais ajouter, c'est que la prochaine fois, j'aimerais qu'on règle la question de langue. Parce que il faut d'abord savoir quelle est la langue majoritaire que les Équatoriens comprennent. À partir de ce moment-là, nous pouvons faire que la majorité des Équatoriens peuvent suivre une conférence le plus importante que vous avez fait ce soir. Je voulais vous remercier pour cette importante conférence. Je voulais aussi remercier les panélistes qui étaient pour moi une conférence très riche. Très riche. Mais la prochaine fois, s'il vous plaît, si vous pouvez régler la question de langue pour voir comment les Équatoriens, je pense que les Équatoriens ne parlent pas anglais, au moins une langue que les Équatoriens comprennent. C'est pour cette raison, pour suivre cette question. Merci beaucoup et je vous remercie beaucoup pour votre conférence.
Merci, Mr. Cruz. Thank you, Mr. Cruz. He is based in Geneva, so he makes a good point about having a discussion in either French or in Spanish, I would say, or even Portuguese is now official in Equatorial Guinea. So, but at APROFORT, we actually decided to have a number of sessions like this, and this one was meant to be in English, also because of the type of panelists that we wanted to have in, and also the type of audience we wanted to hear the messages here. We already had last week where Mr. Cruz also participated, presentation in Spanish with local civil society and colleagues was was not open, but future ones will hopefully have them for everyone to participate. Thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you very much.
Just before,
yes,
just before
Joel.
we go, just let me say to you and to Mr. Cruz, that we will be posting the bits of this conference online, and we will be translating it into Spanish, not French, because it's not my strongest suit, but Spanish. Thank you.
Perfect. That would actually help solve this issue with our colleagues in Equatorial Guinea. Thank you very much, Sara from TI France. Thank you very much, Sara from Human Rights Watch. Thank you very much, Ana Lúcia, for agreeing to participate in this. Thank you very much, Tutu Alicante. I know that you are in many battles, and this one is just one of many. So thank you for taking the time for joining us. Thank you, Joao, and the colleagues from TI Portugal for helping with this. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucas.
Thank you, everyone.